Wonderful. Well, Jamie, do you want to kick us off?
Do how do I do that again?
I don't think we need to take actually now that we do have quorum here, right? Yeah, we do. Do we need to take it do roll call, Kristen?
Yeah, just go around. It can be informal and just say where you're joining from. Name and where you're joining from.
I can kick it off. Jamie calling in from Ann Arbor. Pass it over to Dan. Dan, I see you're unmuted.
Yes, I'm Dan. I'm calling from Los Angeles, California now today.
Zachariah calling in from Ann Arbor. Pastor Jordan.
Hi, I'm Jordan Ellison. I am here in Ann Arbor, and I will pass it to Jeffrey's next on my screen.
Hi, everyone. Jeff calling from Ann Arbor. Julia?
Hi, I'm Julia Good calling from Ann Arbor. Rosanita.
Hi, I'm Rosanita calling from Ann Arbor. I think that's it.
Awesome. Okay. So we did have two little additions to the agenda. One of them being we wanted to talk about the Green Fair and see if we had interest in having a booth at that upcoming event. And the other one is related to the rights and duties tenant hand booklets. So Zachariah, do you want to cover that one as well, the booklets? Are you comfortable with that? Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
sure. So and just some background, we created let's see, we have this committee, the tenant education committee. We created another committee for to talk about the enforcement practices for right to renew and early leasing ordinance. And do we have anything else? I can't remember if there was any other group that's been meeting. I think that's it. But I just want to give any newcomers background on what the purpose of this committee is. If we're just trying to talk about how to educate tenants about their rights, and we have also discussed how to educate landlords about their duties. So I guess the rights and duties to both parties should be communicated. So as you all know, we have these handbooks, which are created by the city, they're printed by the city and distributed. Landlords are supposed to be giving these out to tenants when they move in. We've heard from a lot of people that that's not happening. However, it seems like maybe more landlords are starting to do it, given the increased demand based on what Kristen reported to us. The staff is able to edit some of the contents of these handbooks. Which is, I think the white part can be edited right here, which is the part written by staff. I think there's also a blue section for landlord advocates, and then there's a green section for tenant advocates. In order to change the landlord or tenant advocate sections, I believe we need to go through a longer process that's detailed in the city charter, I think. Anyway, it's more involved, but staff can edit their section, is my understanding, whenever they want, and they have done that a couple of times in the past couple of years. The most recent edit that I'm aware of is that they've taken out the voting rights section of the booklet. There were some court cases recently. One was threatened in, I think, East Lansing, and the other was in Ypsilanti. Basically, the landlords were unhappy that they were, from their perspective, compelled to certain speech, which is giving these booklets out when the speech had nothing to do with renters, nothing directly to do with renters' rights and renting an apartment. And so the section in here that doesn't have to do directly with renting had to do with voting, and it explained how to register to vote in Ann Arbor. So I think staff just, at the direction of city council, remove that section from the booklet, and I believe that all booklets printed from that point, from sometime in June, July, will no longer have that section. I was hoping to make propose to this committee that we make a request as a commission to staff that they keep us informed about changes. And that perhaps we can even start a conversation about certain sections that we feel should be changed. Things that should be focused on more, things that are in here that we don't think are very important, etc. I don't think we've really identified those issues in the booklet, but I would like to start this conversation of, number one, requesting that we are notified about these changes directly when they happen, and number two, that we think about any changes that could be made to these booklets, at least the white section.
Oh, I had a question about the booklet because I've never, being brand new, I've never seen the booklet. Is there a PDF online that I could go to on the Renters Commission site?
Yes, I'll send it out right now.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. And I've got another question, Kristen. Was that PDF updated to reflect the recent changes, like the removal of voters' rights?
It should be. I will check. I know, I'm almost positive the link on the clerk's office page is. I'll check.
Christy, when you said that send it out right now, you mean to send it to website or to the email, please?
I'll send it to the group.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
A little history. This has been ordinance in Ann Arbor at least since the early 80s. Landlords have been required to do this. And I think as paperweight has dropped off over the years, that it's gotten distributed even less. It was never distributed very well. But I definitely support, do we need the full commission to vote on asking staff to keep us notified?
I don't think so. I can let staff know that the Renters Commission has requested it, and then I can like keep my ear out for it.
Just a quick question. Kristen, do you know who, like, is there one specific department within the city that kind of like that's their, like, is it one specific department that's making changes to the booklet, or is it kind of like whoever it applies to might make that request, or?
Good question. I don't think it's changed very frequently. I think in this case with the voting section, that was, I believe, prompted by the attorney's office.
Okay.
But I think it would kind of depend, maybe if there was outdated information and then a department let the clerk's office know. I also think it is subject to city council approval. So that kind of passes through the clerk's office, but it kind of depends on what the change is and where it's coming from.
I guess I have another quick question. Would it be best to like write something formal from the Renters Commission, or is that not necessarily needed?
For requesting notification?
Yeah.
You can. I think that'd be fine, and then I can share it. Or it could be, you could attach it as a communication to city council.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything to add on these booklets. Would now be a good time to talk about the Green Fair, I think was the other part on the agenda that was added. That is,
Before, Zachariah,
Go
can I interrupt?
please do.
And this can come up later. We just talked about the notification, but we didn't talk anymore about our actually reviewing and seeing if we want changes as a commission. Like 3 minutes ago, I emailed Jamie, so you probably didn't see it yet. But I think it would be nice if we did some education, either internally or community invited also, on landlord tenant rights, and maybe reviewing this booklet is one way to do it. If we go through, sections of it all together, just to make sure people have a grip on what the legal meaning is.
I think that's a good idea, personally. I know Richa, who was on this commission, until she resigned, started to do that, and that's in a document in we created a drive folder for this committee. But I think that's a fine idea. It's one of the ways that we can reach tenants, and I'm guessing there's some things in here that we would want to at least emphasize more than they are emphasized here.
Yeah, I second that. I think any way we could kind of condense the information down a little bit for people too, because it's like easy to read, but like for who, I feel like, because it's like, it's kind of, there's some legalese in there that I don't know is super accessible to everybody. So I think that would be a good idea. Jeff?
Kind of unrelated, but it just suddenly occurred to me. Is that document available in other languages too for accessibility?
That's a good question. Not that I'm aware of, but I can see if we have one.
I think it's a really good question, and earlier on, quite a few months ago now, we were looking at the websites of other similar renters related parts of different city governments, and a couple of them had some really good different foreign language resources where they had a lot of their resources translated and were available online. That was really nice. One thing I'd like to bring people's attention to, though, is that there is a fine that's listed right in the cover, the inside cover of the booklet, which discusses, says landlord's failure to distribute this book as required by law shall be punishable by a fine up to $500. And to my knowledge, and I think I've checked in on this, I don't think these fines have been issued anytime recently, so it's not a regular thing. I know that rental housing services has a mentality of trying to cooperate with the landlord and do warnings first and then issue fines. I'd like to kind of better understand whether that's the best way to do things. At the very least, confirm that no fines have been issued recently, and see if there have been fines further in the past.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
That I think that would be great, but also how I guess how far back does this go, and is it something that could be required more often? Because I've been here in this particular apartment for almost 10 years now, and I don't ever remember getting one, and I don't ever remember seeing one like, hey, as you renew, here's a copy of this, or even when the property here changed hands a couple of years ago, even with the new owners and everything, it was never something that was ever brought up or talked about. So that too, especially with new owners, that might be some either every other year or some other kind of requirement that it's redistributed, not electronically, on paper.
Those need-
It has been the law at least since the early 80s, late 70s. And I believe when rental housing folks were at our last meeting, they said they have not issued fines because they asked people to distribute, and then they did, so they didn't give a fine.
How are the different rental properties or property management companies supposed to get the books? Is it that they request a certain number from the city? Does the city just periodically say, here's 100, like, or 50 books? Like, how does that, what's the process?
The booklets are available from City Hall, so they can just come and pick them up. Sometimes if they're requesting a lot, it takes a minute to prepare them because we just have like boxes full of them in a closet. So if somebody comes in and asks for 400, sometimes it takes a minute to get them, but that is how they get them. They just come and pick them up.
Julia, you brought up the idea of reviewing the sections in this booklet and sort of interrogating their worthiness of being here. How do you think we should go about doing that? Do you have a particular process in mind?
I mean, I don't. I mean, I kind of think it makes sense to do it. I mean, there's value in doing it as the education committee, but I think there's also value to the whole commission doing it. And, you know, maybe just taking each section and spending like, 15 minutes on it, does everybody understand? Hopefully people will read in advance. Do you understand what this section means? What clarification do we need to understand it? And does that lead us to think any of the language needs to be changed?
I had one other question, because I'm assuming that it goes to landlords who are homeowner landlords as well, right? Who are renting out their homes. So and they have to go through a rental inspection, right? So when they're doing whatever they need to do at the city to do that, are they informed that they have to, when they're signing up to be a landlord, are they informed that they have to hand out the book?
I don't know. I can try to find out about that also. I'll put that on my list for John Reiser. That's a good question.
It is a good question. I'm assuming they're not, because I doubt the city wants to get into details of being like, oh, and by the way, there's a security deposit law and you have to hold your money this way. And oh, by the way, this is the way lease, I mean, when you go to a new community, there's laws, and if you're starting a business, you're expected to know the laws of the community you're located in. So I mean, yes, it would be nice if it was easier, but it's not that hard. You can look it all up online. Like any of the other businesses in town, mechanics, restaurants got way more rules than landlords do, and they all figure out what the laws are.
Yeah, and I just wasn't sure, like, because they do have to go through the inspection, property inspection, right? So I didn't know if that was, a part of it for when they're first starting or how that worked. I was thinking especially too with the people who are accepting the vouchers, because since we have the was it the income ordinance, right? So that means theoretically more landlords are going to be accepting vouchers, and including homeowners. And so I just wonder about that in the tenant book and those tenants receiving it.
But Zachariah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna cut in front of you again, but Rosanita, what do you mean by homeowners?
Well, because there's like I look at it as two separate landlords, right? Because you have the apartment complexes which is the one that people, I think around here, people typically think about, right? Like, in terms of tenants and renters, or sorry, tenants and landlords. But then you have the people who are renting out their homes or their condos. And that's what I'm talking about for having to hand out one of those booklets, whether it's owner occupied or whether or not it's, somebody who lives in North Dakota, but is renting out their home here to a family or a student or whomever.
So
Yeah, I think-
it's important to recognize, and maybe you were gonna say this, Jordan, that if you're legally renting out your place,
Yeah.
there's no distinguish. You are a
Okay.
landlord.
Yeah.
If you own a place and you're sharing a room, sometimes it can fall into a different category, but there are occupancy
Yeah.
standards also with the city for that. So it is a business, even if you have one unit or you have 5,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's essentially what I was going to say. I do get your point, Rosanita, that you're looking at the two things kind of separately. And, in some ways they are. Like, for example, if it's owner occupied, you have certain things that you can do slightly differently. Like you can be a little bit pickier with tenants without it being discrimination, essentially. There are some differences in that, but I mean, this is a safety, a safety and rights issue. And so, yeah, as far as I know, there's really no difference. I'm trying to think, I don't know of any opportunities. You guys have brought up just kind of a couple things. So we are all houses. We don't have like large complexes for our small business, and we're a small-ish family business. I can't think of any opportunities where we are specifically reminded to hand them out. We have always handed them out at lease signing. We provided an electronic one and then tell tenants to pick up the paper one. And because we honestly don't see people for a lot of lease signings, we have a lot of out-of-state tenants, and they're signing from San Francisco, so they get the electronic one in their lease, and then at our leasing office building, there's paper copies. So it's a little tricky. I think that there are ways that you could remind landlords to give them. I'm not sure, the environmentalist in me also wants to think like, you mentioned, Jeff, like giving them out every year with lease renewal physically in person, paper wise, seems like a lot, but I defer to you guys as tenants to tell me like, no, I really think that we need to do that. I'll always, defer to you guys on those kind of things, but I guess I worry. I mean, these are pretty hefty. They do require city resources to print them. So not that I think that we should not, we should pay for things that are safety and rights related when it makes sense. So I don't know that like every year in paper would make sense, but I think that we could consider something like when you sign a renewal electronically every year, you should be getting it. I think that seems like kind of a reasonable. I know we've had a big debate about paper versus electronic kind of previously in our discussions, but maybe that's something to consider, Jeff. I think that's a good point of like, when are you getting it? If ownership changes, sometimes the leases don't even change. They just kind of assume the lease at purchase. So there's not a ton of opportunity, I think, for, just trying to think of how it's worked. We don't buy houses regularly. It's very rare because it is very expensive to buy here. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess that to me seems like kind of a compromise that you could say, all renewal leases could include it if that's what tenants really felt was important. That seems feasible, but the paper use for every single tenant with 50% renters in Ann Arbor each year, to me, would just give me kind of some environmental and B people / resources. Are we using our city resources wisely if we're spending this much time printing that many? But I'm open to you guys telling me, no, it's that important. So, and just give those 2 cents.
I think it's a good question about the electronic versus paper. I lean towards paper because it seems to stand out more. And if it's standing out more to tenants, I think that's a huge plus. I would be curious to see what the cost is of all these booklets. But I know that at least in the short term, we're gonna keep going with these paper booklets in paper form. So touching on a few things that have been mentioned previously here. Rental housing services, I don't even know during their inspections if they ask questions about this booklet, you know, yeah. So I didn't think so. That's interesting, you know, I get that they're mostly structural, that they're looking at most of the structural component of the rental units. But still, you know, that could be something that we recommend to city council, that they ask rental housing services to start doing that. Because that's a great moment where the city's engaging with the landlords and can give.
What would you envision for that, Zach? Like as part of the inspection, there's just a checkbox that landlord certifies with each new lease signing, they are giving out rights and duties. It would just be like an attestation essentially, or what is that? What feels comfortable or what makes sense to you guys on that? No.
I think that would make sense personally. And then if there's ever a complaint about these booklets, well, then you will have the landlord saying, well, you have on record them saying we gave them out. And if it turns out to not be true, well, I'm not so sure that a warning would be necessary in that case before a fine. On top of that, I think that I'm curious. I think I did ask this question to rental housing services about how they would keep track of the warnings, because if you have repeat offenders and you're not keeping track of those offenses and the warnings, and how can you possibly say, well, after one warning, we're going to give a fine on the second one, on the second strike? That doesn't make a lot of sense if you don't have a system for it. So I think either if they're not going to have that at a station at the point of the inspection, then it would make sense, I think, for us to recommend that they keep track of these offenses. And then on our end, we should encourage tenants who don't receive the booklets to submit complaints. But I think if we switch to electronic, that's one concern I have, is it could just be one of the small links in a long series of links. And I think the probability that they're going to take note of these things might go down. And then the last thing is just to bring it back to the question of how should we go about, we should think about what our purpose is here in reviewing these booklets, but I still want to ask how are we going to go about doing this? I think it would be helpful to compare to other resources. So there's a great handbook from the state legislature, which is definitely longer, but it has, in my opinion, more practical information. There's some great questions of, hey, you're in this situation, what do you do? And they have pretty good recommendations from what I can tell. I think that some of this information probably should be in this format in our booklet, because I'm tempted to give tenants these instead of the city one. So I give both, but whatever. Like I said, we have the notes from previous meetings, and I'm wondering if we should set up like a working group meeting, or I don't know if Jamie, since you're chairing here, if you have any thoughts about how we should go about reviewing them and what our purpose would be in doing so, because I can think of a few possible purposes.
I'll let Jeff jump in first and then I will answer. Oh, you're muted, Jeff.
Sorry, I thought I hit the button. Jordan, you made a great point about the expense and the environmental impact. I think we might want to consider some sort of rule change at the city level that says, new tenants always get a paper copy, but if you're going to renew leases electronically, then it has to be included electronically as part of your leasing documents. I think that would be a good kind of balance there. I do agree that a paper copy tends to have a little bit more impact. Ask me about doing standardized testing on paper pencil versus computer, and you can see that. But having electronic copies that are distributed every year, if a landlord was to renew via electronic lease, I think would be good. And also, if we are able to establish some sort of translation in various languages, that would be a much easier way for people to access those in whatever language was most convenient to them. If like the inside cover of the paper copy had links or QR codes or something that said if you need to see this in Spanish or Arabic or whatever, that it was, you know, here's a way you can do that. The other thought I had would be this would be more for complexes and places that have offices, but you know, I know that there are posters that are required to be put up in certain areas. And would it be feasible to require landlords to have a poster in their office that says, you know, have you seen this book? You know, these are your rights as a tenant, you know, and whether it be QR codes or whatever to link to that as well. So even if people aren't getting it either accidentally or on purpose from their landlords, they still have the possibility, the potential to have gotten it on their own.
Awesome. Yeah, great points, Jeff. Thank you. I think going back to Zachariah's point about kind of what the purpose for reviewing the booklet would be, at least my like feeling from what Julia was saying is, and I think this is what I most strongly agree with, is we want to make sure that it's user friendly for people, because like it's really good to make sure everyone has it, but we also want to make sure that it's digestible and useful information for them. Like going back to Zachariah's point about the state info seeming maybe a little more user friendly or relevant. So I think that could be one purpose of reviewing the booklet. I don't know if this is a great time to throw this in here, but when I was reviewing our rental services meeting that we had from March, I was really just feeling like rental services is asked to do a lot of different things. Like, and almost wondering. So the way that I think about it, you know, they are like any other department, they've got fixed resources, but the more that we ask them to do, that takes away their time from other things. So like, while I think it's really important to make sure that enforcement is happening, I don't know. I think that's just something to keep in mind, that like, if we have a bunch of people contacting rental services that they're not getting these booklets, like what things, I just think we need to try and think capacity wise, like, do they have the ability to handle, like if there's this increase? And then maybe should an additional point of the conversation be, does it make sense for, is there anywhere else within the city that could handle enforcement a little more strategically? I don't know. Those were just some of my thoughts that I had. I don't know if anybody, what people
Yes.
thought on that.
Speaking of the handbooks, and I do have a concerns. I believe not only the landlord, I think the tenant, they all have the problems to, one is to handling out, to give out those handbooks. And for those, lot of renters, they even don't know, there's lots of them believe, they even don't know there's the handbook things, and not to say, okay, I would like to know the access to have those handbooks. So I think one of this is the how to let them to have the chance to know and to have the access of those handbooks should be one of our concerns. That's the basic things I believe.
I'm kind of wondering if, I mean, it sounds like the main point of distribution is at the city downtown, where for everyone who's not downtown, it is pretty hard to get down there. Is it a possibility to, have copies like at the library, right? Like, was it the library and the senior center or something? That way, because that's typically when I think of places that have a hard copy of something, I think of kind of those two locations, mainly because I have elderly parents. But yeah, like senior center, library, and like, was it the National Disability Network, formerly known as the CIL? It seems like just good distribution points if you want to have some for tenants.
I think that's right, and we should have those there, but I don't want to get away from the fact that it is the landlord's legal responsibility. And in almost every case for a new tenant, they're handing out keys. They could be handing this out at the same time.
Oh no, I agree on that. But it's also where, I mean, I don't remember my boyfriend getting one. And if he did, then he just never showed it, right? But but as a tenant, it's if you're hanging around there or if you've been somewhere for 10 years and now the one you got 10 years ago is outdated, then you could just pick one up there. It's not trying to get rid of the landlord responsibility. It's just another way for a tenant to get a copy.
Completely agree, Rosanita and Julia. I thank you for the suggestion, Rosanita. I think that's a very good way. Good to engage some community partners on that. And I think the library is a great idea. So would be, I think there's some community centers as well that could probably host these. I know we have other things on the agenda, and Jamie, I just want to remind us that we probably have some other things to get to. I don't want to totally monopolize this meeting. But there was also the Green Fair, and since that is time sensitive, maybe we should discuss that briefly, and that is kind of related to the handbooks, because that would be a way to distribute them. Jamie, is that all right if we talk about that? I mean, you are chairing, so.
You're good. Keep rolling.
Okay. So the Green Fair is on September 22nd, I think. It looks like applications can still be accepted. We have done one other Green Fair where we showed up, we had a table, Kristen helped get some materials out there, and we handed the booklets out. We talked to tenants about what was important to them. And I know that OSI, the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, does have some new materials. I don't know if they're quite ready, but I think they are, regarding weatherization and rental units. And that they might like us to distribute that as well. So I think I'd just like to pose it to the committee, this question of, do we want to submit an application to get a table?
I'm kind of wondering if I could sit there. I don't want to suggest we get a table if I can't volunteer. It's in the evening of Friday, September 22nd. Is that what you're saying?
That's right, from 5 to 8 p.m.
Okay, well, I'd be willing to sit at a table. If somebody joins me, then I think it makes sense for us to do it.
Yeah, I think I can do it too.
I was just gonna ask, where is it located again? I don't have the date, but where is the location?
Downtown, on Main Street, they close it off.
I could probably do it as well.
Is there any opposition to us submitting an application for Renters Commission? Doesn't look like it. Kristen, should we submit an application through the organization application form? I know last time you went through a different route.
I can submit it. And then I will let you guys know. I don't anticipate an issue with getting a table.
Great. I'd be happy to follow up with OSI to see if they have any materials they want to, rental related materials they want us to distribute.
So
I do have one comment. Since it is a green fair, maybe we should have fewer hard copies and a QR code.
Definitely open to that.
Well, and I don't know what it entails to get the QR code with the city, but even if we just had the website on like a little, standing thing, so it could be like take one or look it up.
Yeah, QR, I mean, if it's just a link that already exists, QR codes are really easy to get. Just free QR code generator in Google will find one for you. I use them all the time at work. And it would be, yeah, it would be nice to maybe have it either on a flyer or something, or a poster, so that fewer people having to take the hard.
I also have our banner right here in my office. So we had a table banner printed so we can look very official. And I am happy to make a QR code flyer, Jeff. I do that a lot, but we have this really cute little, just to show you guys. We can be all official with our table cover that we got printed by Black-owned business in Ipsy. So that's my modeling for tonight.
Okay, awesome. Well, it sounds like we're gonna move forward with the green fair. And then I can kind of transition us into our last agenda item for tonight, which, thank you, Rosanita, this was your suggestion, was to talk about the housing code. So kind of in preparation for this meeting, I went back and rewatched our March meeting that we had with rental services. And I took some notes that either I or Kristen can send out to everybody, because I don't know, I just like to have things like in different formats. It helps me understand a little bit better. But I wanted to bring to the attention of the group a couple of things that stood out to me. One of them being, and this might sound familiar to those that were there at the meeting, but it was mentioned during that meeting that Ann Arbor's housing code was developed by a team of volunteers and a building official back in the 60s. And it's only been revised once since the 80s. The rental services folks, they mentioned that like the gold standard of housing codes is the international code, I think, ICC, something to that effect. Oh, sorry, International Property Maintenance Code. And they mentioned that they are proponents of Ann Arbor adopting that code kind of instead of the existing, just for like uniformity, clarity. And during that prior discussion, they did say that if we were interested, they would be willing to schedule a second meeting with us and kind of go through the differences between that international property code and what's in Ann Arbor's code. And I think that would be useful, even just, you know, kind of to Julia's point of like education for our purposes. I think it would be helpful, at least for me, to like go through the code with somebody that actually like knows what it is. So that was one idea that I wanted to suggest. And the other thing, going back to what I mentioned earlier, so in the notes you'll find there is the stream, the website that the city is now using. You can look up if your rental property has a certificate of compliance, which is what the inspectors are doing. I lost my train of thought. Oh, so just quickly, I had searched my own where I live, and I noticed that the certificate was expired. And I had, you know, did all this at the same time. I just watched the video, and they mentioned that they roughly have about 5,500 inspection slots per year. That's like capacity wise what they can do. And that's for 30,000 rentals in Ann Arbor. So I did just some basic math, and if I did the math correctly, it would take them 5 years to do every rental unit, but the certificates are only good for 3 years. So my proposal is that maybe we spend a little more time just kind of delving into like rental services, getting to know what they do a little bit better. Because I think that could be an area that we either advocate for or maybe just get a little more knowledge about. Like I said, it seems like they're wearing a lot of different hats, and as a tenant, like my first priority is like I would really just want somebody to come out and look at where I'm living and make sure everything's good as quickly as possible. And I don't know if their current infrastructure like supports that. So that's a lot of rambling. Julia, I see your hand up.
I definitely agree that it'd be great to figure out like kind of the cost of the inspections and stuff and see whether it means we have to advocate for more money or if there's a way to generate money. Back in the day, the department was fairly efficient in recouping the inspection fees and penalties to help support the inspectors' salaries. And there used to be a lot less inspectors back in the day. But I raised my hand on the first point regarding the building code. And maybe Kristen could explain this a little bit better, but we do have limits from Lansing on changes we can make to the building code. So it's not fully dictated by state law, but it partially is. So like in the 80s, when we wanted a weatherization law, we couldn't require it for all housing because Lansing didn't require it. But we were allowed to make a niche where we required weatherization. Ann Arbor, since the 80s, has required weatherization for anywhere that the tenant pays their own heat. So there are ways that we can carve out with the current law out of Lansing if we want to have changes, but we can't just adopt what we want.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that. Rosanita?
I mean, being new, it'd be nice to have that education. And part of, I mean, why I brought it up is I was watching the city council meeting and I was listening, to those tenants who were speaking during public comment, and one was talking about the mold in their unit, and in the current code that we had, it was like only for basements. And so, like, I don't know if that is something that can change or not, but it would be nice to know from rental services kind of what that code is that they want to adopt and whether or not it's compatible with what's come out of, what we have from Lansing, right? To know what they could and can't, what they can and can't do. And I'm also kind of wondering too, like you said, there were fewer inspectors previously, but over the years, I just assume we've gained a lot more units. No? Really?
The population of Ann Arbor has grown very little since the 80s. And a bunch of it has, been like, the North Quad, and now this new dorm. Yeah, it's not a big increase in units.
In the rental units, it's not?
Mm-mm.
Oh, wow. Well, when they did it back in the 80s, I wonder how backed up they were. Was it still 3 years?
Yeah,
Wow.
and there were like 3 inspectors.
Wow. I wonder what the inspection checklist changed. That's just me being curious now. Yeah.
Hopefully it's gotten more thorough, maybe. Wishful thinking. But yeah, so I don't know if that, like if a follow-up meeting with rental services would be something that would make more sense, like with this committee or with the whole committee question mark. Zachariah.
Since we already invited them this year to come, and I really appreciated that they stayed for so long and answered all these questions, I would feel a little funny dragging them back to the whole commission. We may want to have a smaller group meet with them, gather the questions and concerns that that have been mentioned today, and maybe just have a couple of representatives go and meet with somebody, see if we can get some answers, see what their reception is, and then report back to the committee.
Yeah, that would make
Right.
sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe like at a time that was more convenient for them. Business hours, they might appreciate. Kristen, did you wanna?
I think that sounds good. I think a smaller group would be great. I think it's likely they'd be willing to speak with you, like a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting during the day, or even in person at City Hall.
Maybe if we prepared like specific things in advance, it would also help. Then they don't have to think of a presentation,
That's a great idea. And Jamie, I was wondering if you or somebody else was interested in compiling the things that were brought up during this meeting to ask to rental housing services. I know that, let's see, we'd mentioned a few things from the switching over to a different housing code, the International Code of Property Management or something like that, to whether or not they'd be comfortable asking about the booklets during inspections, to whether or not they keep track of the warnings for or offenses for not issuing the booklets. I can't remember. There were others, I think, but
The disparity between the 3 years and it being like 5 years.
another good one. Jamie, do you feel comfortable? Would you prefer to reach out to rental housing services, or should one of us just send it?
I don't know if that was me that was frozen, but I didn't catch that full sentence, Zachariah.
I didn't either.
Oh, okay. I think I must have glitched out. I was just asking to you, Kristen, if one of us should ask rental housing services about a meeting, or would you prefer to, since you are our staff liaison?
I'll work on setting it up, and see what, I think I'll have to find out a little bit more. It's like move-in time right now. I don't want to, if they're crazy busy. So I will see, I'll talk to John and see, what makes sense for meeting.
Would it be better to wait until like mid-September or something?
I think the meeting might end up being about that far away. So I'll reach out now and see what they say. I think this is a great idea. And I think it makes a lot of sense to talk with rental housing before the end of the year. So I'll work hard to target early fall.
I don't know if at this stage, but at some stage, I mean, if we want improvements in the rental inspection, I think we'd need some kind of cost breakdown on what one inspection costs, and also to know how much money is generated through fees.
I'll see what I can find. A lot of the city's budget is public. I will see what's available and send it out.
Thanks.
I think just from the one that I was looking at for my own apartment complex, was like $1,500 in fees on the form, which I was like, wow, that's a hefty fee. I mean, I think my landlord can afford it, but I was surprised at the amount. But yes, I can start compiling that list and then I'll share this with the group, and if anybody has additional questions, we can add that on there. A quick question, Kristen, if I want to share documents with folks, I can't remember the rules. Am I able to shoot those out, or do I need to send it to you and have you distribute?
You are sending out to this group, to this committee. That's fine. Just copy me on it.
Okay, cool. Because I do have some like meeting minutes that I've been taking that I think people might find helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine.
Okay, cool. I'll do that. Awesome. Well, I think that was everything I had. Does anybody have a last minute thought, feeling, question? Awesome.
Christian, I have a question for you, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the whole commission, so I guess I could just wait until afterwards and ask you. Do you have a second, Christian?
Cool. Well, thanks everybody. I hope you all have a good rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.